Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How are you doing? It's a constitutional crisis. Welcome to it. It is May 22nd, 2018. I would say mark the date, except it's been a rolling constitutional crisis since the beginning, and it wouldn't make any difference. But I guess in future AP history exams, if they want key dates, you might mark a couple of the ones in and around this area. Where to even start? Oh, I don't know. We could begin with, I guess we've gotten what was meant to be the follow-up to the I hereby demand tweet from Sunday. Donald Trump was able to summon top officials of the Department of Justice to his office, where he, I don't know, did what. I'm not even certain if we will be able to find out in the reports what exactly was said or how it was said. But he has managed to convince, and I think we kind of thought that this would be a sort of compromise position, that the Department of Justice would find some way to shoehorn something in that I guess was designed to satisfy the president in terms of his demand, thereby leveled via the Sunday tweet for an investigation into God only knows what. As you know, I guess, from following the situation, from listening to the show, from reading up elsewhere, I guess the best summary you can give to where we stand with respect to this demand that he made for an investigation is that he and his teammates there in the White House, in the campaign, people who are just hangers-on in the periphery, have agreed to help Donald Trump conflate in the media the fact that an FBI informant told federal officials that there was something extraordinarily fishy going on inside of the Donald Trump campaign, which we all figured to be the case. And the, I don't know what, television land spy novel that's going on in Donald Trump's head, the idea that somebody was an informant to the FBI meant that they were in fact a covert operative, probably planted by the deep state, maybe the FBI, maybe the CIA, maybe both, maybe some other alphabet soup organization, sent there either to make up fake news about the Trump campaign and report them for said fake news, or to entrap them into doing something. I don't know how you would actually do that during the middle of a campaign, unless, of course, you were inclined to such things, but whatever. None of which actually happened, apparently, according to the reports of actual people who have reason to be believed, as opposed to Donald Trump, who has every reason to be disbelieved. Of course, he has made a career of lying fabulously all his through every deal he's ever made, if he's ever made any, and we can't even be sure that that's the case. But they're out there selling that one hard. I did see, was it this morning or was it last night, that Sebastian Gorka, who was also super believable, was out trying to sell the notion that somehow there had been spies sent from the Obama administration into the Trump campaign to try to undermine their work. That's the ambiguity of the language that they're trying to go with, figuring most people who very often, at least among their base, aren't particularly smart, and they are always talking to their base, that most people will willingly conflate FBI informant with covert operative. The essential difference, of course, is it wasn't that there was anybody spying on the Trump campaign. It's that there were shocked and suspicious people telling on the campaign. The FBI informant in question, who I guess all the newspapers have gotten around to finally naming, now that his name is out and about, and I don't know whether the FBI in fact took any precautions to protect him. They were saying that they wanted to do that and that that was important to them and that that was necessary. I don't know whether they ever got around to doing it, but his name is out there and I forget it already, so we'll bring it up in the articles. and then will also join in the chorus of people leaking the name of a FBI informant / covert operative / whatever. And I guess they're not too upset on the Republican side, even if he was a covert operative, with having exposed him, because that's habitual for them at this point. But as I mentioned, Sebastian Gorka on Fox News, I don't know when, yesterday, today, I don't keep track of these things, but it was being tweeted out by Fox News people, in particular Trish Regan, with whom I am unfamiliar, but she's apparently the host of Trish Intel. It's what it says here in her Twitter bio. 2 p.m. Eastern Fox Business Channel show. And she tweets out, quoting Sebastian Gorka and linking to him. I forget exactly why he was fired from the administration again, besides, I mean, it wasn't for being a Nazi, because they don't fire you for that. But he's, of course, nobody again, and a veteran gun failer. I should always point that out. He apparently is quoted as saying, if the accusations turn out to be true, and they won't, about this asset, and again, lapsing into like deep state intelligence operative military lingo to make it sound like he knows what he's talking about. If the accusations turn out to be true about this asset, this will be the first time ever in American history, probably not, that one administration put covert assets for political purposes into the other party's campaign to undermine and potentially frame the candidate of that party. Of course, it is not. And even if you, for whatever reason, decided to discount Watergate, which everyone has been comparing this whole thing to, including the president himself, insisting that this is 1,000 bazillion times worse than Watergate. I don't know why you wouldn't count Watergate. Of course, that would be the Nixon administration putting covert assets for political purposes into the other party's campaign headquarters to undermine and potentially frame the vice presidential candidate of that party, and probably everybody else as well. And had they been able to discover material that would undermine the Democratic candidate, as I'm sure they likely did, though not necessarily during the Watergate break-in, they would absolutely have used that, and I'm sure that they did use that. It also discounts what I would guess you'd have to call the entire, scare quotes, career of James O'Keefe. But I suppose well, if they were even trying to be honest, I suppose Trump supporters would say, well, even if we did do that, and you did do that, because everyone knows, I mean, basically what Sebastian Gorka here has done, you should absolutely regard this as a confession that he has knowledge that the Trump campaign did exactly the same. But you see, they weren't in administration at the time, and so it's totally different. And there is something to be said for the difference between using official resources for these things and simply cheating and being an underhanded, un-American scumbag with private dollars before becoming the administration, rigging it so that you would become the administration and then be able to cover up your thieving scumbaggery. But I suppose that's one point of departure. Not a particularly meaningful one. And as I said, everything is projection with these guys. Sebastian Gorka is simply acknowledging what we all know to be the case. Whatever Donald Trump or Donald Trump World accuses anyone else of, they have already done and are probably still doing to this moment. And that doesn't include James O'Keefe, but it's certainly a description of exactly what his mission is. And gee whiz, who's paying that guy? Can you ever really be sure? We don't know for certain, but yes, we do. All right. So that's sort of an interesting take on the issues of the morning, the ones that are swirling most prominently. By the way, I did see, and I will have to acknowledge, that AJ Delgado has taken note of this Sebastian Gorka comment, and it's been widely shared that what she had to say, which was via Twitter, are we really going with this? That Obama put a spy inside the Trump campaign to frame Trump? Seriously? Not sure if it's IQ, ethics, or simple common sense, but I can't. This is embarrassing. And she includes the very tweet about which we were just talking. And, well, actually, I'm looking at the moment. I've seen this tweet retweeted many times during the morning, but as it happens at the moment, I'm looking at The Hill's retweet of AJ Delgado's tweet, and under the headline, ex-Trump staffer, remember that, AJ Delgado is an ex-Trump staffer. Ex-Trump campaign staffer tears into Trump claim of FBI spying on campaign. It's embarrassing. And it is. She's absolutely right. And she was absolutely wrong, of course, during the campaign to get involved, say, with another of the Trump campaign staffers in a relationship that would prove to be doomed and, let's say, brought its own special set of circumstances, difficult circumstances, along with it. She had a baby with another staffer with whom she's having a running custody battle, and who she apparently dislikes a great deal at this point. These things happen between people, and I suppose because they do, they will happen between campaign staffers as well. But something, Heartland American values, make America great again, and I don't know. Here we are. That's where it's come to rest. Okay. Lots of stories that I can share with you and comment on and bring you, some of you, up to date with. Others of you will have read through them or parsed them already. Let's see. The Warlock commenting this morning, this scandal is backwards. The real scandal is that Obama did not put an operative in place. Well, it would be a scandal, I guess, if, well, certainly had things developed any further at the time. They might have been warranted in doing so. But of course, herein lies part of the problem that we're experiencing today. It would not have been Obama who put an operative in place. It would have been the Department of Justice. And we try and keep those two things separate, which is what is raising issues for Donald Trump right now. That is, the demand of his Sunday tweet was essentially really a demand that he shatter yet another governing norm and make the Justice Department answerable directly on individual investigations and whether the investigations actually take place or not. All subject to the president's direct order. He can order political enemies investigated and order himself not investigated now. And well, in seeking a sort of compromise or side exit from the constitutional crisis that could ensue, the very direct constitutional crisis that could ensue, we simply have an implied constitutional crisis in its place, rather than having the straight-up confrontation between the president saying, Department of Justice, independent as you are supposed to be in your criminal investigations, I insist that you do X, Y, Z with these individual investigations, as opposed to simply saying, that's just out of bounds, Mr. President. There might be independent reason that we find to agree with your point of view, but we cannot simply take your orders and do so. They looked for a side exit and essentially tried to comply and give a different reason why they were complying, which is kind of standard procedure, unless, discounting the fact that you're not ordinarily investigating the president for having corrupted the very process which made him president so thoroughly such that it's in doubt whether or not he ought to be the president. That's generally speaking, I guess, out of the ordinary. But instead of simply saying no and possibly creating a crisis or possibly giving Trump a jumping off point on which to back down himself, we instead have the new precedent that, well, the Department of Justice might just do what the president is asking anyway, and just keep asking, Mr. President, and we'll just keep looking for new ways to comply with your ludicrous demands. All right. I guess we should stay on this side of the subject, and a good way to fill in some of the blanks on it if there are any left, would be with the New York Times piece that looks directly at this confrontation, this crisis, this whatever it is. It is Charlie Savage writing for the New York Times. Poor Charlie has watched democracy unravel for better part of a decade or more now. And this has got to be awfully depressing. Headline here, by demanding an investigation, Trump challenged a constraint on his power. And you know how much we love checks and balances in this country. Unless, of course, we don't like them, in which case, screw those. I hate them. They're like Hitler. Charlie Savage presents things in his piece from yesterday this way. When President Trump publicly demanded that the Justice Department open an investigation into the FBI's scrutiny of his campaign contacts with Russia, he inched further towards breaching an established constraint on executive power. That being, the White House does not make decisions about individual law enforcement investigations. Unless it kind of wants to. It's an incredible historical moment, said Rebecca Roiphe, I don't know, R-O-I-P-H-E, a professor at New York Law School who helped write a coming scholarly article on the limits of presidential control over the Justice Department. Mr. Trump's move, she said, is the culmination of a lot of moments in which he has chipped away at prosecutorial independence, but this is a direct assault. Almost since he took office, Mr. Trump has battered the Justice Department's independence indirectly, lamenting its failure to reopen a criminal investigation of Hillary Clinton that found no wrongdoing, and openly complaining that Attorney General Jeff Sessions recused himself from the Russia inquiry. But he has also acknowledged that as president, quote, I am not supposed to be involved with the Justice Department, unquote, as he told a radio interviewer with frustration last fall. As part of that pattern, he has also denied the account of James Comey, the FBI director he abruptly fired, that the president privately urged him to drop an investigation into Michael Flynn, Mr. Trump's first national security advisor and notorious spy. But Mr. Trump has also been flirting with going further, as he hinted late last year when he claimed in a New York Times interview that, quote, I have an absolute right to do what I want with the Justice Department, unquote. And it's now hard to argue that he doesn't, because he's getting his way on everything. And now, by unabashedly ordering the department to open a particular investigation, Mr. Trump has ratcheted up his willingness to impose direct political control over the work of law enforcement officials. Mr. Trump's demand was part of the latest cycle in the campaign by his allies in Congress and conservative news media outlets, if they are news at all, to discredit the special counsel investigation into whether his campaign conspired with Russia in its interference in the 2016 election and whether he committed obstruction of justice. Of course, much of the rest of the news of the morning is that it was much more than colluding with simply the Russians. It also likely involved the Saudis and the Emiratis as well, and might well have included the Qataris had they taken the hint earlier. But much more to come on that front as well. One of Mr. Trump's most stalwart defenders, Representative Devin Nunes, the California Republican who is chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, has been using his oversight powers to investigate the FBI's investigation, portraying several early steps in 2016 as scandalous. Most recently, with backing from Speaker Paul Ryan, Mr. Nunes has been trying to force the Justice Department to identify a confidential source who assisted the FBI. As a result of that battle, the existence of the source has shaken into public view. The informant, an American academic who has taught in Britain, in this article we're still in don't reveal his name mode, an American academic who's taught in Britain, approached several members of the Trump campaign who had been in contact with suspected Russian agents and tried to find out what they knew about Russian hackers' theft of Democratic emails. Mr. Trump's allies have portrayed this as the FBI infiltrating his campaign with a spy. We understand that some emails were stolen. We should look into that. Oh, someone who's an FBI informant has just called us and says that lots of people in the Trump campaign are talking about just that, and saying things that make me think that perhaps they had something to do with stealing them. Maybe I should tell somebody, because that's the way we deal with crime in this country if you're actually an American person who cares about such things versus those who are involved in the crime. So, on Sunday, Mr. Trump wrote on Twitter, "I hereby demand and will do so officially tomorrow that the Department of Justice look into whether or not the FBI/DOJ infiltrated or surveilled the Trump campaign for political purposes, and if any such demands or requests were made by people within the Obama administration!" Exclamation point. In response, the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, referred the matter to the department's independent Inspector General, Michael E. Horowitz, and issued a statement clearly intended to mollify Mr. Trump. "If anyone did infiltrate or surveil participants in a presidential campaign for inappropriate purposes, we need to know about it and take appropriate action." Now, a lot of people, of course, saw that, and it's not hard to see it this way, as more than just trying to mollify Mr. Trump, but validating a very stupid, fantastical accusation designed to obfuscate what was really going on here. And that even mollifying him with that, "Well, we'll look into it," which, under certain circumstances and with certain people might be an effective weapon. "Well, you demanded an investigation. Well, we'll have that investigation, and then we'll find that none of what you said had any basis in reality, and then you'll be embarrassed and look stupid at the end." But he's already an embarrassment and looks stupid as a matter of course, so that's really not that much of a threat. All he's interested in is different headlines and the ability to steer the base to them. And now he's going to get them. I worry because, well, for a number of reasons, not the least of which is, Rod Rosenstein isn't exactly necessarily a dependably independent guy that we hope so. And a lot of the people who work at the top of the Justice Department, even now, except for Jeff Sessions, I guess, actually, perhaps, those people who've been there for, as career employees, even if they were originally politically appointed but have worked through various administrations, might actually be that kind of person. I don't know. But I have my worries about Rod Rosenstein. And of course, it should be pointed out, as it is every once in a while, when Donald Trump insists that everybody who's out to get him at the FBI/DOJ is a partisan Democrat, you should point out from time to time, as many of you do on Twitter, that they are actually Republicans, and that's a well-known fact about them. And, it's a source of worry, although I usually don't blurt out that I demand an investigation of it. But it wouldn't be out of bounds to have some concerns, even if it was Donald Trump having some concerns about them if they had actually been Democrats. But there's only a certain amount of suspicion that you can creditably entertain in public, and he's gone well beyond that, I think. All right. So there they are, mollifying Mr. Trump, saying, yeah, sure, we'll have the Inspector General look into it. I don't know how long that's going to take, though. And it's not like they're likely to accept the results unless they show what they want. So I don't know whether you're ever going to be able to mollify that guy. The Justice Department rarely discloses when it has opened a criminal investigation. In fact, they didn't disclose the fact that they had opened a criminal investigation of the Trump campaign during the Trump campaign, right? But it appeared on Monday that Mr. Rosenstein's move had satisfied Mr. Trump for the time being without opening a criminal investigation. Still, he established a significant new precedent by directly demanding that the department scrutinize specific actions. Yesterday made explicit what before was implicit, which is that Trump is crossing every line that protects the independence of the Justice Department, said Neil Katyal, who drafted the department's special counsel regulation in 1999 for the Clinton administration and served as acting Solicitor General in the first term of the Obama administration. Mr. Trump's suggestion that Obama-era officials may have abused their investigative authority to spy on his campaign for their own political purposes complicates his demand for the Justice Department to investigate itself now. Still, Senior law enforcement officials appointed by Mr. Trump already knew what steps the department took in 2016 and had not previously deemed those facts a sufficient basis to open an investigation, noted Bruce Green, a Fordham University law professor who wrote the article with Ms. Roife. Legally, it's ambiguous and contested whether a president has the lawful power to order the Attorney General to open or close a case, especially one involving his personal interests. But either way, as a practical matter, it makes little difference. That is because attorneys general who view a president's request or demand as unjustified can refuse it. But the president can fire and replace the attorney general. The primary check against a president abusing that power is the willingness of Congress to impeach him, as well as potential voter backlash. The article by Ms. Roife and Mr. Green documented several scattered early examples of presidents who got directly involved in case decisions. George Washington, they wrote, ordered the prosecution of people involved in the Whiskey Rebellion by distillers in western Pennsylvania who rose up against the federal whiskey tax and threatened its enforcers. Washington later ordered that case shut down. And in the early days of the Republic, I'm sure there were some serious questions about what would be the proper role of a president and all that. We hadn't done things yet. There weren't any governing norms except those, I suppose, borrowed from English common law, and I don't know how protective of the independence of the prosecutorial power English common law was. They were all, after all, the king's prosecutors, the crown prosecutor, as I don't know whether they called them that then or not, but probably. And the independence of the crown, anything from the crown, is probably a questionable prospect. What would make us uniquely American might be that separation. We'll be right back. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We were just, when we left off before the break, we were in the middle of Charlie Savage's article from yesterday in the New York Times, just sort of giving us the background, the solid background that we'll need to understand the burgeoning constitutional crisis, I guess is what we'll still have to call it, of Donald Trump being able to demand of the Department of Justice that they handle individual criminal investigations the way he directs them to, whether they involve him directly, indirectly, or I suppose not at all, which, well, I guess it throws the door open to an awful lot of things. As we were reading a scholarly article by two of the experts named in the piece, discussed the history of the independence of law enforcement from the executive, despite the fact, of course, that law enforcement is an executive function. But way back in the day, by which I mean the day of George Washington, they came up with that example. George Washington ordering the prosecution of people involved in the Whiskey Rebellion dropped and the case shut down. This, of course, at a time when there were not yet any American governing norms under the new federal system, certainly. And so they might perhaps be forgiven for deviating from what became later on the norm after some pretty major restructuring in the intervening years. For instance, as they go on to explain in their paper, such cases were rare and typically involved foreign affairs, And because the president's involvement went unchallenged in some of those previous cases, the Supreme Court never had the opportunity to weigh in about its legitimacy. The Supreme Court refrains from simply posing hypotheticals, even if they arise naturally from a case before it. But they certainly cannot simply posit a hypothetical case and issue advisory rulings like this hasn't been challenged, but if it ever was, here's how we would come down on it. That's not something that the court does. There has to be an active live controversy that really means something, and it needs to be brought to them. They don't simply go out and gather up problems and rule on them from the bench. So if they go unchallenged, well, then there's nothing for the Supreme Court to review. The federal law enforcement system evolved over time. Congress created, created the Justice Department in 1870. And so 1870, of course, considerably later than the 1790s when George Washington was president. Who knows what Justice Department policy might have been at the time had they, A, created it, and B, thought to formulate a policy. But it's a pretty good bet that those founders so interested in the checks and balances might have designed exactly the sort of system, well, something similar to what we have today. A century later, after the Department of Justice's foundation, after the Watergate scandal, the norm of Justice Department independence became more entrenched. Why, you see, we just had a learning experience. If you don't keep them separate, distinct, and independent, you are likely to run into a situation eventually, if you have a president dishonest enough, that he will claim the presidential power to absolve himself of crimes, not only to pardon himself if necessary, but to declare them not to be crimes ahead of time, and or simply leave them on the books as crimes, even when committed by the president, but forbid anyone from investigating and pressing the case against him. We did learn that from Watergate. And, well, it was probably a wise thing for us to say, yeah, that should not be part of our governing norms. Senators have since routinely asked Attorney General nominees at confirmation hearings questions eliciting promises to resist any effort by a president to intrude upon matters of prosecutorial discretion. Did they ask that of Jeff Sessions? Did he answer? Did he lie in his answer? Does it matter since he's recused? I don't know. But almost certainly they were put to him as a matter, as a pro forma matter, probably more than anything else. What sorts of questions do we ask Attorney General nominees? Here's a list of ones we've usually asked in the past. Okay, I'll ask them now, and then I won't listen to the answers. And even if I do, I won't remember what they are. And even if I remember, if a constitutional crisis arises and I can sidestep it, I will. A few weeks before leaving office last year, President Barack Obama published a piece in the Harvard Law Review. I heard they're really into law up there at Harvard Law, about the president's role in advancing a criminal justice overhaul. In it, he nodded to the importance of constraints on presidential intrusion into specific Justice Department case decisions, citing the need to, quote, avoid even the appearance of politicization, unquote, when it comes to administration of criminal law. For good reason. Particular criminal matters are not directed by the president personally, but are handled by career prosecutors and law enforcement officials who are dedicated to serving the public and promoting the public's safety, Mr. Obama wrote. It's too bad we're not doing that now. The president does not and should not decide who or what to investigate or prosecute, or when an investigation or prosecution should happen. Of course, if we believe that he abided by those principles at the time he was president, that would make it very difficult to believe, for instance, that assets, covert or otherwise, were infiltrated into the Trump campaign in an effort to gin up a criminal investigation. But, of course, Trump supporters would say, well, sure, he wrote that, but it was a total lie, which is probably to be interpreted as the Trump campaign saying, we also are telling that lie, or we only are telling that lie, and then we therefore think everyone else is telling that lie too, whether we think so as a natural consequence of believing that since we did it, probably other people do it as well because we're human and in many ways similar to other humans, or whether that is simply a conscious part of their strategy to accuse the other side of whatever it is that they're doing and then point at the ludicrousness of counter accusing them of the same thing and saying, what, you mean I caught you and so now you're just saying it was me all along? Please. It's good inoculation. And so far it has worked, although it also has worked as a pretty reliable indicator of what the Trump people are up to at any given moment. It really hasn't failed yet. I don't know if there's anything that they haven't been projecting on so far, but I'm sure that if we scrutinize things closely enough, we'll find something eventually. Okay. Well, as I mentioned, this is just one of many fronts on which new information is opening. I don't think the day could be complete if we didn't then turn to the AP's story, reprinted almost everywhere, and under different headlines. But I went to the original source here rather than reading it in reprint in any of the other papers or news sources. I don't know. I don't think that for AP stories in particular, it's absolutely necessary to do that, but I did it anyway. Their headline, I'm just curious, what sort of headline were they using? The Princes, the President, and the Fortune Seekers. And I don't know if that's the headline that they used elsewhere. I don't know if they have any kind of deal about that. But this is Desmond Butler and Tom LoBianco who wrote this piece, and it's running just about everywhere and being talked about just about everywhere. Many people are talking about this, and Donald Trump won't say that because it's unfavorable coverage for him. Is it Russia? Is it everybody? Is it a select few? Is it the autocratic regimes that Matthew Iglesias talked about in the tweet we read yesterday? Well, so far it's just them. Yes, that doesn't mean he's right, but it doesn't mean he's wrong either. And I guess we'll have to see how this plays out. After a year spent carefully cultivating two princes, and please, 80s folks, don't start singing that song. Oh, damn it. It's already in my head. You might as well sing it. I hope you're doing it at home, too. After a year spent carefully cultivating two princes from the Arabian Peninsula, part of which is Saudish, Elliot Broidy, that dog, a top fundraiser for President Donald Trump, thought he was finally close to nailing, not a Playboy Playmate, but rather more than $1 billion in business. He had ingratiated himself with crown princes from Saudish, Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, who were seeking to alter U.S. foreign policy and punish Qatar, an arch-rival in the Gulf that he dubbed the Snake. That's very troubling sounding. To do that, the California businessman had helped spearhead a secret campaign, to influence the White House and Congress, flooding Washington with political donations. That would, of course, be known as lobbying. The problem was he wasn't registering as a foreign lobbyist and just was keeping the money and hoping no one would notice anything. Broidy and his business partner, Lebanese-American George Nader, you remember that name, pitched themselves to the crown princes as a back channel to the White House, and everybody wanted a back channel to the White House, apparently. Passing the prince's praise and messaging straight to the president's ears, which are, of course, full of wax and basically useless. He doesn't actually need to hear other people. Anyway, now in December 2017, that is to say then, in December of 2017, Broidy was ready to be rewarded for all his hard work. It was time to cash in. In return for pushing anti-Qatar policies at the highest levels of American government, Broidy and Nader expected huge consulting contracts from Saudi Arabia and the UAE, according to an Associated Press investigation based on interviews with more than 24 people and hundreds of pages of leaked emails between the two men. The emails reviewed by the AP included work summaries and contracting documents and proposals. Now, ordinarily, it wouldn't necessarily be a problem if Americans or Lebanese Americans or American Americans, I don't know, anybody who's an American, or a foreign nationality either. It's really not a problem. It's not outside of the ordinary for a foreign government to hire them, and sometimes for very lucrative contract values, to try and influence the American government on behalf of that foreign government. It's just they ask that you register when you do it so that we can have a clear picture of who's speaking on whose behalf and who's spending money on whose behalf, so we can judge the veracity of their claims. But Elliot Broidy found this inconvenient. George Nader found this inconvenient. Why, I don't know. You don't get taxed differently. You don't lose a larger portion of the money that those governments pay you to taxation or any other outside force. You just have to register, and I guess theoretically it makes the campaign, it threatens to make the campaign less effective, because everyone will know when you say, boy, the Saudi Arabians are awesome and the Qataris are terrible. They'll know, oh, well, the Saudis pay him and the Qataris don't, and that's why he says that, and we'll take it with a grain of salt. But, that's the game. I don't know why anybody would have thought Elliot Broidy, California businessman, would have thought such fantastic things about Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates if it weren't for the fact that they were either paying him directly or that he stood to gain financially by having lawmakers and the president think those things about those countries. I don't know why anybody thought that it would be any different, or that anybody would have doubts about whether or not he was benefiting from having said these otherwise extraneous things about countries halfway around the world. But apparently he thought it would make a huge difference. So the AP, they continue, has previously reported that Broidy and Nader sought to get an anti-gutter bill through Congress while obscuring the source of the money behind their influence campaign. A new cache of emails, and that's serious whenever they bring up emails. A new cache of emails obtained by the AP reveals an ambitious, secretive lobbying effort to isolate Qatar and undermine the Pentagon's long-standing relationship with the Gulf country, i.e. 10,000 American troops stationed there at one of the most important Air Force bases anywhere in the world, let alone in the Middle East, which is an important place. A lawyer for Broidy, a real one, Chris Clark, because apparently there's another lawyer for Broidy, it's Michael Cohen, and nobody believes that. Chris Clark contended the AP's reporting, quote, this is a great way to just simply frontally assault all of this, is based on fraudulent and fabricated documents obtained from entities with a known agenda to harm Mr. Broidy. Notice what's going on here. In addition to leveling, in so many words, the fake news charge, but doing it in an academic fashion, fraudulent and fabricated, right? He says that they were obtained from entities with a known agenda, and that agenda is known to be one that seeks to harm Mr. Broidy. You can see immediately the value then of knowing where your sources get their information and who your sources are and who's paying them. It doesn't clear things up necessarily and can serve as a platform from which to obfuscate, yes, but at least we understand both Chris Clark's motivations, Broidy's lawyer, Chris Clark's motivations, and if Chris Clark gets his way, we'll have information that will help us decide how to evaluate the information being used against Mr. Broidy. And, of course, Mr. Broidy is under the gun here because he sought to avoid doing exactly that with the information he was funneling about the Saudi Arabians and the Emiratis and the Qataris into the United States government, thereby depriving us of the right that he finds so precious to himself and that his lawyer found so necessary to assert on his behalf. To be clear, Mr. Nader is a U.S. citizen, and there is no evidence suggesting that he directed Mr. Broidy's actions, let alone that he did so on behalf of a foreign entity, Clark said. I don't know why Clark has concerned himself with Mr. Nader, but probably, I guess it's not really direct. He's just saying he's a U.S. citizen, so his partnership with Broidy cannot therefore be suspect, which doesn't really follow, but that's the idea. The AP conducted an exhaustive review of the emails and documents, checking their contents with dozens of sources, and determined that they tracked closely with real events, including efforts to cultivate the princes and lobby Congress and the White House. The cache also reveals a previously unreported meeting with the president. He doesn't report a lot of his meetings very well, and provides the most detailed account yet of the work of two Washington insiders who have been entangled in the turmoil surrounding the two criminal investigations closest to Trump. Lobbying and pursuit of personal gain is nothing new in Washington. We all know that. Trump himself, in fact, turned the incestuous culture into a rallying cry when he promised to, quote, drain the swamp. One of his tweets reading, "I will make our government honest again. Believe me," which is Trumpese for "you cannot believe me." Trump tweeted before the election, "But first, I'm going to have to hashtag drain the swamp in D.C." Broidy's campaign to alter U.S. policy in the Middle East and reap a fortune for himself shows that one of the president's top money men found the swamp as navigable as ever with Trump in office. Nader's lawyer, Catherine Rumler, declined to comment. He, of course, supposedly cooperating with Mueller's office, and so under considerably more restraint, I think, than Broidy is. A senior Saudi official confirmed that the government had discussions with Nader, but said it had signed no contracts with either Nader or Broidy. Neither Broidy nor Nader registered with the U.S. government under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, a law intended to make lobbyists working for foreign governments disclose their ties and certain political activities. The law requires people to register even if they are not paid, but merely directed by foreign interests with political tasks in mind. Violating the federal law carries a maximum $10,000 fine or up to 5 years in prison. Broidy has maintained he was not required to register because his anti-Qatar campaign was not directed by a foreign client and came directly at his own initiative. He woke up one day, California businessman that he is, having been, of course, wrapped up in private equity funds and the like, and finding himself as a deputy national finance director for the Republican National Committee. And he said, "What I need to do today in America is warn them of the dangers of Qatar, who is hosting 10,000 American troops and the biggest air base in the Middle East, and makes possible our continuing air and drone wars, unfortunately, all throughout the Middle East and Central Asia. And I need to alert Americans at large, and not policymakers in particular necessarily, of the vast danger that our hosts in Doha pose to us with their sponsorship of international terrorism, which so far has not, for whatever reason, come to rest in the largest military base, American military base in the region. Not really sure why, but gosh, I just feel like that's something I need to share with America. And it had nothing to do with the fact that he was talking to the king of Saudi Arabia, or rather, at that point, I guess the nephews of the is he a nephew? Is he I guess the incoming crown prince, son, nephew? I don't even know. I can't keep track anymore. Anyway, just speaking to the ruling family that owns Saudi Arabia. Just thought I'd throw that out there. I talked to them a lot, as well as the Crown Prince of the United Arab Emirates, but I thought of this myself. Very, very difficult to believe, if not necessarily unlikely. People think about Qatar independently all the time, I guess. Do we? I don't know. We're usually prompted by the news. So they didn't register. Broidy says he didn't have to, because It's not that he was asked to do this stuff by the Saudish or the Emiratis. It's something he thought of all by himself. But documents show the lobbying was intertwined with the pursuit of contracts from the very start and involved specific political tasks carried out for the crown princes whose countries are listed as clients, and that's a quote, clients, for the lobbying campaign in a spreadsheet from Broidy's company, Cercinus LLC. And we see here, he's made an LLC for himself. How smart he is as compared to his lawyer, fake lawyer, Michael Cohen, who only has one LLC. He has several, actually, but he used one for all the nefarious purposes he could cram into it. And you can see clearly that Broidy knows very well that he needs to have a different lawyer, and he has got one. But for purposes of helping Donald Trump get out from under some of the accusations of hush money being paid to his very many mistresses, apparently agreed to pretend that Michael Cohen, incompetent lawyer, was his own attorney. Anyway, Clark says, I have represented Mr. Broidy for many years. Didn't know about Michael Cohen, but I've represented him for many years. He's complied with all relevant laws, including FARA, the Foreign Agents Registration Act. That's what he says in his statement to the Associated Press, but that's what you pay lawyers to do. He's complied with all the laws, but he really hasn't complied with this one. But he did. Well, that's something you can say in a statement to the AP. It's a different question in court, although I'm sure that that's his intention, to claim that he did comply and to say he just never had to register because all the ideas were his own, even though he kept meeting with the crown princes of the other countries and they gave him money. And when he wrote up a list of his clients on his corporate letterhead, it said Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. In other words, I'm sure, when he needed to impress other people or other countries that he was hoping to sign up as clients, he would say, you're in good company. I get hired by foreign governments all the time. For instance, the government of Saudi Arabia, although he will call it Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, both of which hire me. So you're in good hands, or you're in good company. Give me your money. And then when the FBI comes knocking and says, why didn't you register as a foreign agent? This document says these guys are your clients. He says, oh, yeah, they're not my clients. They're just, countries that are out there. And I don't even really have anything to do with them. I just don't like their neighbor, Gutter, at all. And I thought, why keep this to myself? This is important information. Everybody needs to know that our biggest military base in the Middle East is in a country that hates us and sponsors terrorism. I'm not sure where that came from, nor am I sure where these millions of dollars came from, or why I told people these countries were my clients. I must have been confused at the time. Maybe I was all crazy from, say, sleeping with this playmate that I don't know anything about and who was really impregnated by Donald Trump, allegedly. Anyway, summaries written by Broidy, the AP's reporting continues, of 2 meetings that he had with Trump, one of which has not been disclosed before, report that he was passing messages to the president from the 2 princes that he told Trump he was seeking, and he told Trump that he was seeking business with them, which is the whole client relationship thing. These are my own ideas that I'm telling you that these 2 princes told me to pass to you, but they're mine in that I am saying them, and also I am hoping to avoid prosecution for saying them for money and not registering. Does that make sense to you, Mr. President? Certainly. Makes a lot of sense. I like it. By December of last year, the partners were riding a wave of success in their campaign to create an anti-Qatar drumbeat in Washington. Saudi Arabia was finding a new ascendancy following Trump's election. Gee whiz, how did that happen? Broidy sought to claim credit for it, emails show, and he was keen to collect the first installment of $36 million for an intelligence gathering contract with the UAE. It all might have proceeded smoothly, save for one factor, those meddling kids or that is to say, the appointment of Robert Mueller as a special counsel to look into allegations of Russian interference in the 2016 election. And no doubt at the time, Elliot Broidy, who's probably smarter than Donald Trump, but not that smart, and George Nader, same, probably said, wow, an investigation into Russian interference with the election, not really good for anybody, but we might be safe because our interference was on behalf of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, and they're not Russia. But Nader probably knew better because Nader couldn't help himself earlier on, as we already know, but we'll be reminded later on in this article, no doubt. Continuing then, in many ways, the partnership between Broidy, age 60, and Nader, 59, embodies the insider influence that has given contractors in D.C. the nickname Beltway Bandits. Contractors, lobbyists, etc. Okay, Beltway Bandits. Both of their careers were marked by high-rolling success and spectacular falls from grace and criminal convictions, which really go hand in hand, or ought to go more hand in hand in the future, certainly for others as well, and in the past. The onset of the Trump administration presented an opportunity to return to glory. Broidy, who made a fortune in investments, was finance chairman of the Republican National Committee from 2006 to 2008. Was he a general finance chairman? I didn't realize that. He was demoted to deputy, I guess, under the Trump administration. Maybe they knew how troubled he really was. Anyway, when a New York State pension fund, remember this story, decided to invest $250 million with him, investigators found that he had plied state officials with nearly $1 million in illegal gifts, bribes, while collecting $18 million in management fees. That does sound familiar. It's kind of a Trump play. And so in 2009, Broidy pleaded guilty to a felony charge of rewarding official misconduct. We'll be right back. Wow. Well, I'm distracted. I'm glad to be back. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Distracted by a Cliff Schechter tweet. I don't know where this came from. He's retweeting something from, who's this? West Coast. I just retweeted it. Live listeners can go treat yourself to this visual. West Coast is W. Hausen, Whauzen, and what that's all about, I could not tell you. And holy mackerel, the tweet is NRA activism. For the love of God, don't take their guns. And it is selfie. Well, at least one selfie. The other one, I think, had to have somebody else take the picture, but of two, large dudes posing naked with their guns. Now, they're big guns, not that they had to be, but the vital parts that would keep, say, these photos from airing on a television station are, in fact, covered by parts of the guns. In the case of the first guy, Beardo here with a cigarette dangling from his mouth and backwards baseball cap, he's got a shotgun, the butt stock of which, ironically enough, is covering his vital organs, let's say. I don't know how vital they are. Wow. Okay, so, the butt of a shotgun stock is not gigantic, but it's, it covers enough to be effective. The other guy has got an AR-15 style rifle slung across his body and pointing downwards, and it is the barrel, which is narrower, let's say, than the butt of the stock, and it, I guess, barely covers the crucial elements of the photo here. Oh, both of them are generously bearded, both generously proportioned, girth-wise, and I mean their waistbands. I can't tell you anything about the other parts, except that, like I said, not gigantic parts of the guns are covering them up. But this really does to serve as a reminder that many people think that gun enthusiasts, male gun enthusiasts in particular, make some sort of strange connection between their genitalia and their guns, and I guess here they're doing it. And I think, do you think it would be funny if? Well, all right. Well, at any rate, moving on from that, I just thought that was unusual, and maybe I should have that. I guess I should just make that tweet available to the rest of you who are listening on delay. Although, I guess, well, is trigger warning too much of a stupid pun to say? You got to look out for this thing. All right, well, I'll round that tweet up for the rest of you later on. Those of you listening live will already have seen it and pulled your eyeballs out of your head. Okay, where we leave off here. Yes, right, in 2009... You knew this story already. We've shared it with you before. Brody pleaded guilty to felony charges of rewarding official misconduct. That's bribery. And here's someone who had something to say about it. First, though, is Elliot Brody himself speaking about it. I guess in his allocution, he says this in 2009. In seeking investments from the New York State Common Retirement Fund, I made payments for the benefit of high-ranking officials at the office of the New York State Comptroller, who had influence and decision-making authority over investment decisions, Brody said in his plea and cooperation agreement. There's another statement about the case from Andrew Cuomo, who was then the New York Attorney General, who called it, quote, an old-fashioned payoff. This is effectively bribery of state officials, and not just one, said Cuomo, who is, of course, now New York's governor. That's right, it is. And what's weird is that in 2009, he admitted that he was bribing New York State officials. But where do we describe his becoming the finance chair for the Republican National Committee? Because I think they gave a range of dates on that. And it's sort of surprising that you would be able to get convicted of bribery and then a major political party in the United States, really one of just two major political parties we have here in the United States, would say, you know what, you should be our finance director. I mean, it stands to reason, I guess. We're the party that, you know, prefers doing business through such bribes, but it, of course, just fosters appearances of impropriety if we allow you to occupy that position. That seems really weird. Anyway, yeah. Oh, yes, here it is. 2006 to 2008. So he was finance chair. Oh, okay. He was finance chairman of the Republican National Committee from 2006 to 2008, during which time he was bribing New York State officials. But it wasn't until 2009 that he pleaded guilty, and he was already no longer the Republican National Committee finance chairman. He only later became, after his conviction, the deputy Republican National Finance Chairman. So you can understand it's all okay now. 3 years later, Brody's conviction, though, was knocked down to a misdemeanor after he agreed to cooperate with prosecutors and pay back $18 million to the state. So by the time that the Republicans made him deputy national finance chair again, he was only guilty of a misdemeanor at that point, which I guess raises the question, why would you say, oh, I don't know, like vote for Andrew Cuomo for governor if under his watch as a New York Attorney General, was he still Attorney General at the time? He would say, yeah, you know what? You were caught red-handed and admitted to bribing state officials and siphoning $250 million out of the state pension fund and giving it to a thieving idiot. But if we'll give you $250 million, you give us $18 million back, and then we'll just say, you know what? It was a misdemeanor. We all had a big misunderstanding. You just go on back and go back to the Republican National Committee. What harm could come of it? Only the unraveling of American democracy and the end of our institutions. So you go for it. P.S. Me for governor. That's really rather surprising. So, okay. If you can't believe that someone would be able to survive a disaster like that and rise to prominence once again and have everybody, treat him as a key personage and say, P.S., we believe you about your FARA registration because you're such a truthful guy. You've only, admitted to bribery once before, and then we knocked it down in exchange for boosting the political career of, I don't know, you and Andrew Cuomo. Seems like a good deal, right? Surely, though, there are some things which you can't survive and rise again to prominence among Republicans. And one of those things, if you had to pull one out of a hat, would be, I guess last year some might have said pedophilia, right? But now, of course, that's in with Republicans. It's like very fashionable. Hipster beards and skinny jeans and being a neo-Nazi and being a pedophile. That's a big deal, and it's a great set of credentials to carry with you into the Republican Party. If you hadn't guessed that last year because you weren't hip to the whole projection thing, you could be forgiven. It was very difficult to understand that the Pizzagate was projection. It was still like, come on, that can't really be the case that everything they say is projection. They are accusing the Republicans, or accusing Democrats and Hillary Clinton's campaign staff in particular of running a child sex slave ring in the basement of a pizzeria in Washington, D.C. And though it's true that it ended up being unprovable that it was in the basement of a pizzeria, it's still probably largely true, right? Of course. Absolutely. And so you say, now that couldn't possibly be projection. Why would anybody do that? Why would anybody call attention to pedophilia if your campaign was, for instance, filled with pedophiles or the candidate was a pedophile? Well, I don't know. It's counterintuitive. I'll give it that. It's very clever in its cover, I guess, because it so far hasn't caught up with the candidate. But anyway, as we were saying, of course, this was all prior to Roy Moore winning the nomination for Senate. And, it wasn't until earlier this year, I guess, that we all learned that Republicans were cool with pedophiles. But we would have learned it earlier if we had been paying attention to George Nader, because that was his problem too. And I say problem with an asterisk. It's problem/asset in the Republican Party. Me, I see it as a bug. They see it as a feature. Never the twain shall meet. We just can't seem to see eye to eye, me and Republicans. We just can't. I tell you, it's so wacky. But yes, that was Nader's problem, according to the Associated Press. As a young Lebanese immigrant to the U.S. in the 1980s, he quickly established himself as a forceful, independent operator, founding a policy magazine called Middle East Insight. By the 1990s, he had risen as a behind-the-scenes player, setting up dinners for Israeli and Arab dignitaries with Washington power brokers and U.S. lawmakers. But it was the after-hours activity, I guess, that was troublesome for him, because by May 2003, Nader was convicted in the Czech Republic of 10 counts of sexually abusing minors and sentenced to a 1-year prison term, the AP revealed in March. I don't know if they usually get tougher than that in the Czech Republic on that or what, but that was the situation. He served his time, though, in Prague, according to Czech authorities, and then was expelled from the country. Is he allowed back in? One wonders. That sordid past, though, was no obstacle, as Nader cultivated a formidable list of high-powered contacts. Maybe because they were pedophiles, too. One never knows. After the 2003 Iraq War ended, he reemerged there, as contractors were making a fortune helping the U.S. coalition and the post-Saddam Hussein government rebuild the country and arm its military. Nader worked with private military contractors from the U.S., in fact, one in particular, by the name of Eric Prince, who I'm sure has nothing to do with pedophilia, and whose former company, Blackwater, which also has nothing to do with pedophilia, became infamous after a shootout in Baghdad in 2007 left 14 civilians dead. But as you know, again, feature not bug when there are dead civilians and heavy armaments here in the United States. Nader has been living in the UAE, like Eric Prince, working as an advisor to Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the Abu Dhabi Crown Prince, known as MBZ. It was Nader's connection to MBZ and Eric Prince that eventually caught the attention of U.S. investigators in the Russia probe. Whoops, how did that happen? Mueller's team was interested in two meetings that took place before Donald Trump's inauguration. One was in the Seychelles, a tropical archipelago in the Indian Ocean, which drew scrutiny, the meeting, not the Seychelles, because it included Prince, an informal advisor to Trump and sister of his Department of Education chief, right, Betsy DeVos. And who else was there? Russian investor Kirill Dmitriev, who has close ties to, you won't believe it, Russian President Vladimir Putin. The meeting has prompted questions about whether it was an attempt to establish a back channel between Russia and the incoming Trump administration, and I guess later led to inquiries about, well, maybe it was meant to lead to back channel communications between UAE and the Trump administration. The other meeting that was of interest to them was in Mos Eisley, Trump Tower in New York. Nader, the pedophile, and MBZ, the Emir of Abu Dhabi, were at both meetings, both the Seychelles meeting and the Trump Tower meeting. That Nader, he winds up everywhere. Just weeks after those meetings, Brody and Nader met for the first time during Trump's inauguration. The two men were soon working out their budding partnership. Nader sent Brody his private email address on the encrypted Proton mail service, which is his right to do. What a meeting, though. That must have been something. You know what? I'm a pedophile, and you allegedly had an affair with and impregnated a Playboy playmate. You and I, we got a party together. We need to be in the same office because too many of these hostile work environments around. We need to settle these things. We need to settle people down and stop with all the sex stuff at work. You and I should be operating together. I don't know if they traded those stories. From the start, the two men had a 2-track mission. 1, make money, and 2, have sex with anybody they could find, and if they couldn't find adults, children would be fine. Apparently, that was the 2 tracks. But that's not the tracks that the AP is talking about. I should just let them tell you. The 2 tracks were to carry out a campaign against Qatar that would curry favor with the princes of Saudi Arabia and UAE, of course, and to then turn that success into millions of dollars in defense deals, documents show. The two men barely knew each other, but Brody had the ear of the president. Nader claimed he had the crown prince's ears. On February 7th, 2017, Brody wrote to a staffer for the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee about a bill aimed at sanctioning Qatar for alleged support of terrorist groups, part of what Nader called hammering Qatar, emails show. The next day, Brody forwarded Nader questions about a potential contract with Saudi Arabia to train Arab troops to fight in the escalating war in Yemen, which is very distasteful all by itself, I should add. The 3-year civil war there left thousands of civilians dead, millions displaced from their homes, and put the entire country on the cusp of famine in what is now the largest humanitarian crisis in the world. The war has drawn in myriad combatants, including a coalition led by Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and backed, unfortunately, by the U.S. And so Brody on a campaign to help train more Arab troops to commit these atrocities. What a gem. Brody and Nader proposed multiple plans to the princes for more than $1 billion of work. One pitch was to help create an all-Muslim fighting force of 5,000 troops. A second was aimed at helping the UAE gather intelligence. A third would strengthen Saudi maritime and border security. Still another was related to setting up counterterrorism centers in Saudi Arabia. One wonders what the Saudi Arabian government does with its time, that they needed to outsource all of this stuff to anyone. To Americans, it doesn't make any particular, it doesn't pose any particular problem if you're going to outsource it to choose Americans, but Why not people with military experience? Why not people who can keep their pants on around kids? Why not there people who aren't allegedly having affairs with Playboy playmates, although that's not necessarily disqualifying, I'm sure, among the very religious folks in Saudi Arabia and UAE. They tend to get away with those things for whatever reasons. And I don't know. I'm not sure why. I guess that never came up in the discussions. But seriously, why not a military person for all of that? I mean, they had access to Eric Prince. Were they going to have Prince do it? Why would Prince need Broidy and Nader as middlemen in all of this? I do not know. The gist of their plan was to show evidence that Qatar was too close to Iran and supported Islamist groups. They're, of course, being Islamic. That might happen. Including the Muslim Brotherhood. Oh dear, not them. Iran is Saudi's main regional rival and on the other side of the war in Yemen. Ideally, Broidy and Nader would work to persuade the U.S. government to sanction Qatar and move a key military base, from Qatar to another location in the Gulf. Broidy said he had a direct line to Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. Why? For what purpose? And what benefit is there in this particular deal? No one knows, but it sounds really super impressive and easy to believe because they're both large-scale money-grubbing thieves. Mnuchin is a close friend of mine. My wife and I are attending Secretary Mnuchin's wedding in Washington, D.C. on June 24th. Remember that gross spectacle? By the way, I don't see it mentioned here, but of course, that's entirely plausible. Broidy's wife, we learned in reading some earlier articles a couple of days ago, maybe a couple of weeks ago, is in the movie production game at some level, and so is Steven Mnuchin. So they may, in fact, have known each other through film production circles and California rich a-hole circles, possibly as well. But that's a big circle in California. So that's what Broidy wrote to Nader. Mnuchin is a close friend of mine. We're going to the wedding. I can help in educating Mnuchin, to the extent that's necessary for anything, on the importance of the Treasury Department putting many Qatari individuals and organizations on the applicable sanctions list. Boy, do they love those sanctions lists. And they're good tools, right? We don't like you, or you don't do what we say, we'll put you on them. Give us some money, and we'll take you off of them. The Al Udeid Air Base outside Doha is an important U.S. military asset in the Middle East. It's the forward operating base for U.S. Central Command and hosts some 10,000 U.S. troops, a geopolitical arrangement that Qatar's Gulf rivals would like to change. They want to be the hosts, I guess. Remember, by the way, when it was like a huge issue, and it was a different king and a different regime, sort of, in Saudi Arabia. But remember when it was like outrageously infuriating to Muslims worldwide, of course, according to Osama bin Laden, who was a jerk, and we shouldn't be taking his word for anything. It was an incredible insult to have American troops in Saudi Arabia. And now I guess the Saudis have gotten used to it and would like a few more. And that's not terribly surprising. Osama bin Laden and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia don't really like to admit that they moved in the same circles if they ever did. So not terribly surprising. Just another one of the weird complications that make Saudi Arabia the annoying puzzle that it is. So the base outside of Doha, 10,000 troops there, something that Gulf rivals of Qatar would like to change. Amid the fissures in the Gulf, the base is a key leverage point for Qatar to maintain influence in Washington. Unlike other countries, Qatar imposes few restrictions on base operations and is even building new facilities for U.S. troops. So Donald Trump normally would love that sort of arrangement, right? We're defending you. You should build, you should pay for it. You should build it. I want you to build a McDonald's there. And the troops do too. So get on the stick and we'll stay. Getting the U.S. government to move its critical base in the Gulf was unlikely, and polishing up the image of the Saudis and Emiratis was a hard sell. Saudi Arabia has a history of torture. and human rights abuses. I don't know how clean Qatar is on that necessarily, but certainly true of Saudi Arabia. Many Americans still associate the country with the September 11th attacks. Why? Of the 19 attackers, 15 were from Saudi Arabia, and the other two of the other 4 were from the UAE. The UAE's track record is no better. Last year, the AP revealed that the UAE was operating black sites in Yemen, where its soldiers have tortured prisoners, including, in some cases, tying them to a spit and roasting them over open fires. Well, we love barbecue, don't we? Qatar has a troubled record as well. Here's our answer, I guess. International human rights groups have dinged the country, and by the way, dinging is a war crime, dinged the country for its treatment of migrant workers. Well, they are right up our alley, aren't they? Preparing the country for the 2022 World Cup. Amnesty International, in a 2013 report, stated that migrants from Southeast Asia worked in a state akin to slavery, forced labor, and living in squalid housing. And that sucks. Think about that while you're there, if you're there. And probably not very many members of our audience going to be in attendance at the 2022 World Cup, but not terribly different from most of the fabulous luxury resorts throughout the Gulf, I am sure, all built on and currently staffed with, at least in hidden ways, people who probably would describe their conditions as forced labor and squalid housing. But hey, my iPhone is ringing, and I have to go get it. We all have that problem, I guess. Despite the challenges of Saudi Arabia's human rights record, the partners' timing was good. Trump and many other Republicans in Washington viewed Saudi Arabia as a counterweight against Iran. And it always works out beautifully to go with the enemy of my enemy in the Middle East. Brody reported he was making progress, and Nader kept the principals briefed on their adventures, emails show. Brody boasted that he had got the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, California Republican Ed Royce, to back that anti-Qatar bill. This is extremely positive, Brody wrote. He claimed he had shifted Royce from being critical of Saudi Arabia to being critical of Qatar. Not hard to do, right? You can probably move them on the same issues. I don't know if that meant Royce was pro-Saudi Arabia at that point, but okay. Fine. The AP reported in March that Brody gave nearly $600,000 to GOP candidates and causes since the beginning of 2017. Royce got the maximum allowed. Corey Fritz, a spokesman for Royce, noted the congressman's record. Royce has long been critical of both countries. He said Royce had not changed his stance. Brody also bragged that he had caused, and that's in quotes, caused Royce to praise a senior Saudi general, Ahmed Hassan Mohammed Asiri, in words that were then memorialized in the congressional record. Nader was thrilled. A U.S. congressman publicly flattered a Saudi official whom documents show was helping to evaluate Brody and Nader's contract proposals, which you can see why it was so easy as Michael Musson was observing in the comments here. He was saying, I don't know why people seem so surprised that the Middle East kingdoms pursued Trump so aggressively. Trump wants to run things like a monarchy, family and major roles, etc. This is something those countries understand and are more comfortable with. And that's true. And I think illustrated here is the other principle on which they both operate. If you say nice things about me, I'm going to like you. What am I going to do? Say I don't like you just because you said such nice things? What am I going to do? What? That's natural, according to Donald Trump. And guess what? They operate the same way. And you can do that in a authoritarian monarchy. It's just unusual and abnormal here in the United States. But we're getting used to it. Don't worry about it. Okay, so at the end of March, Nader wrote that he'd had a terrific, magnificent meeting with the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, who we call MBS, not MBZ, but MBS. As you know, prospects for that billion-dollar contract were pretty good. He was very positive overall, Nader wrote. The prince even asked if asked them to discuss their contracts with General Ahmed, who they had such great news for with regard to the congressional record recently. The money for the lobbying, though, was another matter. So we'll pick up with more about this unusual situation, after this short break. Yes, it's rather amazing and rather long, and apparently very necessary. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's get right back to it and see if we can't finally make our way through this piece. It's an awful long piece, but there's an awful lot of interesting detail to it that I think helps explain much of what's going on and will become necessary later on as background as things continue, if we ever go anywhere in any of these investigations. We left off, they were trying to hammer out getting the money. At Nader's request, after flattering this Saudi general and having a terrific, magnificent meeting with the Saudi crown prince, at Nader's request, $2.5 million was channeled in 2 installments from his company in the UAE through a Canadian company called Xiemen Investments Limited, Xiemen, for whatever reason, which someone familiar with the transaction said was run by one of Broidy's friends. The money was then routed to a Broidy account in Los Angeles because it was totally innocent. And I don't need to register as a foreign lobbyist because I'm not getting paid by a foreign government. I'm getting paid by some Canadian people, you see. The UAE pays Nader's UAE company. The UAE company, though, is only paid through a Canadian company, Xiemen Investments Limited, run by Elliot Broidy's pal, and then sent to a Broidy account in Los Angeles. Totally on the up and up. The transaction had the effect of obfuscating that the money was for the political work in Washington had come from Nader in the UAE, you see. Some of the recipients of Broidy's spending in Washington said they had no idea that Nader was involved, and why would they? Broidy previously told the AP that he did not think to question why the money was routed through a foreign entity. I didn't think to ask why my friend in Canada had my money. I have no idea. And interestingly, it was routed through another foreign entity, and he wasn't registered as a Canadian foreign lobbyist either. But okay. At that point, Broidy might have realized the dangers of not registering as a foreign agent. It was all over the news. 3 Trump advisors registered retroactively as foreign agents. Michael Flynn, the spy, Trump's former national security advisor as well, who had done business for Turkey, and Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort and his longtime deputy Rick Gates, who did business for Ukraine. Broidy was undeterred. They won't find out who I am. I'm not famous. Nader cheered on his anti-gutter exploits and told him to keep hammering the bastards, because they're bastards. Armed with fresh cash, Broidy pitched Nader a media blitz that would put the fire to Qatar. He'd persuaded an American think tank, Foundation for Defense of Democracies, to stage an anti-Qatar conference in defense of the neighboring democracies of Saudi Arabia and the UAE, I guess. Broidy wrote Nader that his plan included the commission of 200 articles assigned to the foundation and other think tanks. Mark Dubowitz, the foundation's CEO, later said that Brody assured him the funding was not coming from a foreign government and that he had no contracts in the Gulf. Why would you tell Mark Dubowitz that? And also, I guess, Mark Dubowitz might be asked why he was being asked to stage an anti-gutter conference if there was no interest coming in it from the Gulf. Because who's interested in being anti-gutter? It would really probably be interests in the Gulf, don't you think? But Mark Dubowitz needed to hear that the money wasn't coming from there so that he could keep it, so that's what he heard. On April 21st, 2017, Brody sent Nader the draft of an op-ed to show the impact of his campaign. It was marked confidential. 3 days later, The Two Faces of Qatar, a dubious Mideast ally, was published in the Wall Street Journal. The opinion piece, co-written by retired Air Force General Charles Wald, who had been the deputy head of U.S. European Command, called for moving U.S. military assets from the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. The United Arab Emirates would be a logical destination, wrote Wald. What readers did not know was that Wald was listed in company documents as a member of Broidy's Sir Sinus team that was pitching contracts in Saudi Arabia. And I guess even if you did know it, well, he's pitching contracts in Saudi Arabia. That's not the UAE, and the UAE is where he's saying they should move the airbase. And okay, so what can I tell you? He works for a Gulf state, but he's pitching moving it from one Gulf state to another Gulf state, not the one he's working for. But it might be worth noting that he's listed in company documents as a member of Broidy's company. But I guess at that point, I don't know. I mean, for whatever reason, that's not disclosed. And the Wall Street Journal might not have required it to be disclosed anyway, because they are what they are. Asked why he had not made his conflict clear in the op-ed piece, Wald denied he had ever worked for Brody. I am not part of the team, period, Wald wrote. I can't speak for his documentation. Now, that's interesting because, of course, one of the other practices over there in Trump world is to occasionally put people on the list as being on your team if you need to seem impressive when they are, in fact, not on your team. And then, of course, one of the other hallmarks of dealing with the Trump gang is that you will find that people who are on your team and are listed on your team will later deny that they were on your team. So really the value of any written materials in terms of, believing anything that anybody involved in Trump world has to say, whether in print or otherwise, is pretty minimal. But they don't really stand by the authenticity of documentation. The good news is that in court you can still do that, and you can't. Just the fact that you say that's wrong and it didn't really establish anything isn't enough to obviate its influence with a jury, if we ever get to that stage. A person familiar with the arrangement, who spoke on condition of anonymity because he was not authorized to speak on the record, we get that, thank you, said that Wald consulted with Brody but could not join a trip to pitch the contract in Saudi Arabia because of a scheduling conflict. Brody's leaked emails refer to Wald's involvement almost 4 times. Well, that's an ambiguity. Oh, I'm a contractor. I don't work for him. I'm an independent contractor. Okay, sure. The Foundation for Defense of Democracy's conference was set for May 23rd at the Fairmont Hotel in Washington. In a Sir Sinus progress report from Brody to Nader, Saudi Arabia and the UAE were listed as the clients, Major General Asiri as a consultant, and Brody and Nader are leader/liaison, raising questions about Brody's contention to the AP that he was not working for a foreign government, i.e. putting the lie to it. The conference also set off a flurry of more anti-Qatar stories in mainstream media, which Brody cataloged for the Crown Princes. The partners were jubilant when Trump made his first foreign trip, not to his allies in Europe, but to Saudi Arabia. 2 weeks later, in a major escalation of tensions, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and regional allies launched a travel and trade embargo against Qatar. It was hard to tell whose side the U.S. government was on. One day after the UAE and Saudi Arabia began their blockade, Trump sent a series of tweets signaling support for the two countries' actions and embracing an anti-Qatar stance. He said his recent visit to Saudi Arabia was, quote, already paying off. They said, paying off. Imagine using that language. They said they would take a hard line on funding extremism, and all reference was pointing to Qatar. Perhaps this will be the beginning of the end to the horror of terrorism. I shouldn't even bother pronouncing gutter as gutter. You know, he says it's Qatar. Quarter. I don't even, quarter pounder? I'm hungry. U.S. officials quickly tried to walk back Trump's comments, saying the U.S. was not taking sides in a dispute amongst its Gulf allies. A week later, on June 16th, the Trump administration completed a $12 billion sale of F-15 fighters to Qatar that had been approved earlier by Congress. The move was at odds with the president's rhetoric on Qatar, but it paled in comparison with the $10 billion in arms deals with Saudi Arabia that Trump had previously announced. In late September, Brody arranged for the most coveted meeting for any lobbyist in Washington, an audience for himself with the president in the Oval Office. In advance of the meeting, Nader wrote Brody a script, the email shows. There were several objectives: to sell the idea for a Muslim fighting force, to keep the president from intervening on Qatar, and to arrange a discreet meeting between Trump and the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, because everything can be super discreet with the president. The princes, quote, are counting on you to relate it blunt and straight, Nader wrote. Nader told Brody the meeting was potentially historic and to take advantage of this priceless asset, i.e. get money. And there was one more thing. Nader asked Brody to tell the president about his connections with the Crown Princes, Nader's connections, I guess, using code names for all three, because super legitimate. Code names. Okay. Appreciate how you would make sure to bring up my role to Chairman, Nader emailed, how I work closely with two big friends. That is some code name. Two big friends. Boy, oh boy, these guys are super clever. After the October 6th meeting, Brody reported back to Nader that he had passed along the messages, wink, wink, and had urged the president to stay out of the dispute with Qatar. He also said he explained Sir Sinus's plan to build a Muslim fighting force, simultaneously known as the plan of most Muslim nations. Their fighting forces are Muslim. President Trump was extremely enthusiastic. He wrote, Brody said Trump asked what the next step would be, and that he told the president he should meet with the Crown Prince from the UAE, adding, President Trump agreed that a meeting with MBZ was a good idea. Oh boy. The White House did not respond to repeated requests for comment. Despite that successful readout, Nader wanted more. He wanted a photo of himself with the president. A big request for a convicted pedophile. I didn't add that, by the way. That's in the AP writing. Nader wanted a photo of himself with the president. A big request for a convicted pedophile. How are they going to deal with that? They're going to do it. That's the answer. Brody was co-hosting a fundraiser for Trump and the Republican National Committee in Dallas on October 25th. The Secret Service had said Nader wouldn't be allowed to meet the president. Why? Because the Secret Service takes its job seriously. Convicted pedophile meeting the president? No. Now, really, I don't even know if that should be the Secret Service's job, but I guess on a frontline thing for them is if you're a convict, that raises a flag. And they don't want them meeting the president because of the physical danger, I guess, that they think that, violent offenders could pose to the president. I don't know whether they particularly care about, or they're particularly perturbed by pedophilia as the charge, but I imagine just any conviction will probably do it for them. It should be up to the political operation, I guess, to say, well, we either can or can not handle the heat of whatever meeting, but we're glad, I guess, that the Secret Service is there to say, yeah, in the first instance, convicts are off the list. But apparently, something worked. Check this out. So, Secret Service says, no, Nader can't meet the president. Now, it was not clear, the AP says, if the objections were related to his convictions for sexually abusing children, but they did say no. Brody drafted an email to Trump's chief of staff, John Kelly, asking him to intervene on behalf of his friend, whom he oddly called by a different name. Isn't that weird? Although, how different was the name? George Vader, which is different and ironic and strange. A misnomer that appears elsewhere in the emails. In other words, not only do I want you to intervene from my friend, but I won't tell you he's a convicted pedophile, and I'll give you a fake name, but a name that I can blame the fakeness of, if I'm called out later, on simply a typo. Oh, did I say Vader? I meant Nader. Well, you see, but we did the background check on Vader and it came up negative. And now if I do it by the right name because of your dumb typo, Nader, I get a convicted pedophile. That feels bad for me. Did you see what I'm saying? Oh, well, gosh, I'm sorry about that. But you can't feel too bad because, of course, you guys are all pedophiles. Oh, yeah, you got a point there. One of my companies does deep vetting for the U.S. government, he wrote. Who wrote? Brody? We ran all databases, including FBI and Interpol, and found no issues with regard to Mr. Vader. Well, you wouldn't. I mean, except for, running the Galactic Empire. But that might not come up. There was another issue. Can you believe it? On top of all this, RNC officials had decreed there would be no photos with the president without payment because they're super clean guys. But at fundraisers, that's actually probably relatively standard practice. I wouldn't be terribly surprised by that. So, Brody, well, now we have a problem. You make a payment, you got to tell normally whose money is this. You got to give them their name. And if you say George Vader, it'll clear, but it's wrong, and it causes problems for the political operation. So how are we going to deal with the fact that in order to get the picture with the president, with the pedophile guy, they were going to have to give his real name? How did they deal with it? Brody suggested that Nader meet the suggested threshold with a donation of between $100,000 and $250,000. And I guess he must have done it because he ended up getting the picture. That's a pretty good, I guess that's the price, right? How much to get a picture with a pedophile with the president? That much. It's unclear exactly how the two issues were resolved. Records from the Federal Election Commission show no donations from either George Nader or George Vader. But on November 30th, Brody gave $189,000 to the RNC, more than he had given to the RNC in over 2 decades of Republican fundraising, including, by the way, as we mentioned earlier, several years as national finance chair for the Republican National Committee. Never gave $189,000 or anything, I guess, probably close to that, to the RNC. But he did here. How interesting is that? It's interesting on 2 levels, as I clear the throat once again. Not only that he did this for pedophile George Nader / George Vader, but that once again he was making straw man donations or payoffs on behalf of somebody else who had done something horribly wrong, essentially, right? So the big question mark, well, really, do we really believe that Donald Trump impregnated this Playboy playmate and that Elliot Brody just agreed to take the rap and pay $1.6 million? Well, if we didn't already know that he had previously in his New York bribery conviction pay off the mistress of one of the New York state officials that he was bribing so as to cover up that affair, then perhaps we would have difficulty believing it. But then there would be this issue here too. What are we going to do? I want to get my friend a picture, and we can't get him into the event and get a picture with the president so long as he's George Nader, because they'll find out he's a convicted pedophile, so we'll call him Mr. Vader. And by the way, we'll try and waive them off from doing their own background check by telling them, oh, I own a company that does vetting. I vetted him. You don't have to. If the Secret Service bought that, I have no sympathy for them. And then secondly, how are we going to get $100,000+ to the RNC in a way that they credit to Nader without finding out that his real name isn't Vader or whatever, and he gets the picture so that the president has to pose next to a convicted pedophile. How does the RNC reconcile this, by the way? Are they happy about this? Have they given back the $189,000? Are they angry with Elliot Broidy at any point? I don't know. Well, the answer is, look, I'll pay for the picture, I guess. That's probably one way they resolved it. Or else maybe somebody was smart enough to form yet another LLC, unlike Michael Cohen, who can't figure that out. But $189,000 lands in the account of the RNC, and it comes from Broidy. I see. Yes, that's right. We have that correct. Broidy gives it to him, and he says, I waive my right to the picture, I guess, and said I want this guy who's totally not convicted pedophile George Nader to have my picture instead. And who's, at the photo station, who's going to gainsay this, right? I don't know. Okay, you want that guy to take the picture? He doesn't, nothing about him screams pedophile, except the fact that he's taking a picture with Donald Trump, which, might be a hint. But ordinarily, in the ordinary, course of things, no. So there we go. The result, a picture of Nader and Trump grinning in front of the American flag, because pedophilia is super American. It was time for Broidy to visit the UAE now and nail down his first contract. He and Nader had already discussed sharing the profits and begun setting up a UAE subsidiary of Sir Sinus, Broidy's company. That way they wouldn't have to involve the Canadians in those payments anymore. In late November, Broidy planned to complete the contracts in the UAE, where MBZ was hosting a Formula One auto race. But maybe that was too public. I think, my friend, not very wise for you to be seeing, sick here, at this event, Nader wrote to Broidy because of how super American he is. I think, my friend, not very wise for you to be seeing at this event. Many journalists and people from Russia, oh my God, where's my music? They're from Russia, and I can't even play it because I don't know why this... For whatever reason, every once in a while, like during my show, the automatic pause everything button comes on, and I must be clicking on it by accident. Okay, so there's people from Russia here, and you can't have them seeing you, because that's, what, problematic for you all of a sudden? Well, Russia and other countries. And they're all around to see the Formula One auto race. Broidy met Trump once again on December 2nd, by the way, also a very interesting deal. He reported back to Nader that he'd told Trump the crown princes were, quote, most favorably impressed by his leadership. He offered the crown princes help in the Middle East peace plan by being developed by Jared Kushner. Sure, it was being developed by him. Oh yeah, he's working on it all the time. He did not tell Trump that his partner had complete contempt for the plan and for the president's son-in-law. I guess that didn't come up, yeah? You have to hear in private, my brother, what principals think of Clown Prince's efforts and his plan, Nader wrote. That's funny. Nobody would even waste a cup of coffee on him if it wasn't for who he is married to. Really? I thought he just was viewed as just a real prodigy. Days after Broidy's meeting with Trump, the UAE awarded Broidy the intelligence contract the partners had been seeking for up to $600 million over 5 years, according to a leaked email. The Muslim Fighting Force contract would be even larger, potentially bringing their entire Gulf enterprise to more than $1 billion. I suppose that's where Eric Prince was getting his cut. In January, Broidy was preparing for a third meeting with Trump at Mar-a-Lago during celebrations of the president's first year in office. Nader was supposed to join them, but the initial payment for the intelligence contract was late. He delayed his trip to the U.S. for a day to make sure it was wired. On January 17th, Broidy reported that he had received the first installment, a cool $36 million. Terrific, Nader wrote before his flight. First among many to go. Man, if I could just get a piece of that, eh? Hours after that money transfer, Nader and Broidy discovered that despite all their precautions, they had not escaped notice. Dang. When Nader landed at Dulles Airport outside Washington, D.C., a team of FBI agents working for Mueller was there to meet him. He was relieved of his electronic devices and later agreed to cooperate. It's unclear why Nader was detained, but he is a link between the Trump campaign and the Russian investor who attended the meeting in the Seychelles. Could it be the $36 million wire transfer the day before? I think that might have had something to do with it. While there is no evidence that Mueller is interested in the lobbying effort, Nader's detention kicked off a spiral of misfortune for the two partners. In February, the AP, the New York Times, and other news organizations began receiving anonymously leaked batches of Broidy's emails and documents that had apparently been hacked. We're against that. News stories linked him to plans to leverage his White House access for clients in Africa, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. But I don't need to be registered as a foreign agent. Broidy fought back. He sued Qatar and its lobbyists, alleging in a lawsuit filed in March that the hack was a smear campaign. Oh, now I remember that. Yeah. We believe that the evidence is clear that a nation state is waging a sophisticated disinformation campaign against me in order to silence me, including hacking emails, forging documents, and engaging in espionage and numerous other illegal activities, Broidy said in a statement at the time. So, well, it's entirely possible that that was happening. And it is weird that somebody had incriminating information that seemed to come from private emails that Broidy was sending and receiving. That is true. But wow, what a fabulous candidate for yet another instance of projection here. Well, of course, it must have come from a nation state hacking my emails to incriminate me and conduct a smear campaign against me. Everybody's doing that these days. I'm doing it, so everybody else must also be doing it. Wow. Qatar responded that it was Broidy who had engaged in a propaganda campaign. Probably both are true. Then on April 9th, another blow, the FBI raided the premises of Trump's personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, seeking information on hush money paid to Stormy Daniels. You know all about that. Broidy, it turned out, was allegedly, I would have to say, also a Cohen client. He'd had an affair, with Playboy playmate Shara Beshard, who got pregnant and later had an abortion. Broidy agreed to pay her the $1.6 million to help out, so long as she never spoke about it. I'm curious whether she ever will. I acknowledge, we know the whole story about where he pretended that he was the guy involved with Beshard. In the end, Nader and Broidy's anti-Qatar operation lost its momentum. There's been no traction on the effort to get the base in Qatar moved to the UAE. In late April, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, you remember that he was that now, called for an end to the bickering among Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar during a trip to the Gulf. Last week, Saudi Arabia distanced itself from Nader and Broidy. A senior official said the Crown Prince bin Salman ordered an end to, quote, the engagement with these people, the pedophiles. But Broidy's huge contract with the UAE, it is good to go. And that is to say it is very bad, but also still going on. Wow. Well, that's an awful lot of information, and it ate up all of our time, and we can't get to the rest of this stuff, but I will point out one or two other things that got said along the way that are interesting that we just alluded to. Will Bunch, whose article we spent a tremendous amount of time on yesterday, tweeting that the Trump presidency hangs by a thread named Shira Beshard. It's really Beshard, I think. If Broidy paid off the Playboy model to personally benefit Trump and got Oval Office access to lobby for KSA, UAE in return, that's straight up bribery, game, set, and match. Of course, there's no such thing as game, set, and match with these guys. He is reacting to the tweet of Susan Simpson. Remember her? The View from LL2. She puts together some interesting threads as usual, pointing out that it was December 1st, 2017 that Elliot Broidy first made a payment of that $1.6 million, the first installment in the $1.6 million in hush money negotiated supposedly by Michael Cohen. That prevents Beshard from speaking of her affair / abortion with David Dennison, whoever that may be in this case. And it is December 2nd, the very next day after that first payment gets sent, that Broidy has that private meeting with Dotard J. Trump that was mentioned in the AP piece. That little bit of information not included. The day after the first payment gets taken care of, boom, Donald Trump will see you now. And that's the point at which he goes in and relays the messages from the two big friends. fantastic. What a situation we find ourselves in here, and what a government we are running here. Boy, we're never going to unravel all this. We just simply can't. Well, there's much more out there. Something we didn't get to today that was very interesting. Another situation in which Jared Kushner seeks to mine huge amounts of money out of the Middle East, this time from a Saudi-backed bank, even though they think he's the clown prince. That would be really interesting. But they don't mind bribing clowns, apparently. They're in the habit of doing so. We're going to catch up with much, much more on tomorrow's show. Greg Dworkin will be back, and I am holding in reserve a very interesting piece read to us by Paula Appanese, who will enlighten you with the piece's views on tolerance. Very interesting approach to the topic, very helpful way of thinking about it, but we'll have to get to that.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Here's what Justice has coming up for you on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Ex-felon, another one, and NRA President Oliver North says he wasn't criticizing the Parkland shooting survivors, he was just calling them dupes. What else? Trump is so unpopular that his properties are taking the hit. And much, much more. I assure you, all the great stuff we missed today.